There are a lot of local legends about the dangers waiting for unprepared hikers on the Appalachian Trail. With 1,400 people missing and never found, it's possible you've heard some of the stories before. This might just be one of them, a fake story from an unproven witness, except for the little evidence that I kept. Treat it as entertainment, if you wish. I just want to share it. Maybe find some answers to what happened. I'm what some people would call a ghost tourist. Sounds ominous, I know, but what it means is I love to spend my free time traveling to places that I've heard scary stories about. It's not that I particularly believe in ghosts or any of those stories, but it adds some thrill to the journey, and it's fun to share some chilling tales with friends on the road. Dan is one of these friends. We used to travel a lot together, make blog articles about our trips. Never met anything remotely supernatural before, if you're wondering. Or at least we thought so. This trip started differently. He initially just told me his cousin's friend went missing during the hike on the Appalachian Trail, and his cousin was a witness to what happened. Only issue is the police didn't believe his story, and neither did his family. Didn't help that he was notably drunk when he made the statement and that his testimony was really weird. But I'll let you judge that instead. Here's what Dan told me. So the story, it involved an outhouse. You know, that old school wooden thing where you can relieve yourself. They usually smell horrible and are less sanitary to use than just doing it out in the woods, but you get the idea. With the amount of hikers the trail gets in some places at once, it seems better not to spread the waste around too much. Anyway, however horrible it sounds, it's not too uncommon, historically, to find demise inside the outhouse. The privies have taken many victims due to the depths of their pits, chance of drowning in the muck below, and toxic fumes that incapacitate you so quickly if you stick your head down there for too long. If you have nerves of steel, read about the Cincinnati privy disaster of 1904. The story involves kids, though, so it's not an easy read. Anyway, I found it completely believable that Dan's cousin could have just fell through the hole to the pit. Maybe because he dropped his phone down there, tried to reach for it, and lost consciousness. So if an outhouse was seemingly involved in his friend's disappearance, why not tell the police to go search through it? Dan replied that they did. Search for it, that is. His cousin led them to the place where it happened, which was close to their camp with its remains still present. The campfire spot was there, the footprints were still discernible in the mud around, but the outhouse just vanished. Or maybe it never existed in the first place. It didn't help that it was raining, and they couldn't really find more footprints than the ones the cousin had shown them. They were searching the area, but so far to no avail. I have to admit, the story left me feeling somewhat excited about our upcoming trip. It was partly because it sounded very implausible, but it would still add some thrill to the hike. I think Dan even started doubting it. He was afraid the police were going to blame his cousin for the disappearance, but apart from him calling to the station a couple of times to repeat the exact same story, they let him go. But when I asked later whether we should meet with him this summer, Dan said they weren't in touch anymore. Apparently the lack of support from the family towards his cousin's theories grew the distance between them, and finally he stopped answering their calls. Weird, I thought, but we waved it off. I forgot about the whole thing until one sunny day in April, when Dan threw what seemed to be a local tabloid in front of me. Big, bold headlines, unflattering pictures on the cover, you know the sort. It took me a second to notice it, but there it was, right on the front page. Seemingly stock picture of what looked like an old wooden outhouse, with a moon-shaped hole carved in its doors, captioned, "Cursed Privy? Multiple people missing in mysterious circumstances." We exchanged glances, and I opened up the newspaper to find the article. My initial thought was Dan's cousin just couldn't let this go, and shared his conspiracy theory with the media. But the article detailed a second case with a similar testimony. A couple went hiking together, they separated because the boyfriend had to relieve himself. Now he was missing, and his photo was printed right below the stock picture of the outhouse. I read it a few times, noticing there was no mention of the privy in the second story. It was just a guy who needed to pee, went deeper into the forest, and disappeared. Girlfriend in question refused to speak with the press and didn't answer any further questions. I pointed this out to Dan, and we both came to the conclusion it must have been his cousin who talked to the press. Dan seemed worried about the guy, but there was nothing we could do. It's not like he was answering his calls and texts anyway. So it's time for our trip, and me and Dan decide to make the outhouse story our little project. Talk to the locals, take pictures, even go looking for it on the trail. It could be a cool study of how urban legends are made, and maybe we could find something to help his cousin get some closure after what happened. When we arrived at the rural town near our chosen starting point, it was filled with hikers. The Appalachian Trail has become increasingly more popular, with everyone from Silicon Valley IT developers to popular YouTubers making it their goal of the year. Many of them read the local news to fish for any information about bear sightings or upcoming weather conditions, and so many of them heard about the outhouse. We interviewed some, getting the usual deal of creepy hiker stories, weird humming sounds, lights flashing from the forest depths, and the classic one of something much bigger than a bear moving around their tent at night. No one has actually seen the mysterious outhouse, though. But then there was this one guy. He overheard us talking about it, and he seemed very giddy about talking to someone who was investigating this case. He seemed to be very fascinated with the subject, gave us all the details about the people involved, even mentioned Dan's cousin, although apparently his efforts in finding him were in vain. The guy moved somewhere else, he said. Dan didn't seem to know that, judging from his face when he exchanged glances. But the guy kept on talking, and we didn't interrupt. Finally, he told us about discussing the subject with one of the local shopkeepers who knew more about the area. Things started to get really interesting then. The shopkeeper told us about the Kirk family, still living scattered in the outskirts of the town, not really participating in the local social life and rarely shopping for anything essential. Back in the time of the Great Depression, he said, a young man called Caleb Kirk disappeared, and a big search was organized, only for his remains to be found weeks later in the pit of the women's outhouse that stood on the land belonging to his family. It could have been an accident, but 2 stories were spread by the townsfolk. They either blamed his cousins for pushing him there, or his mother for locking him inside whenever he was disobedient. Most of the people who participated in these events were dead by then, but the memory stood. The Kirks were always perceived as the weird ones, and they didn't really try to restore their reputation. We took many notes during the conversation, but we decided to check the man's words right after we parted ways, going straight to where Dan's cousin lived, or apparently used to live. Turns out the guy was right. We knocked on the door, and a middle-aged woman opened instead and told us that Brody, that's Dan's cousin's name, sold his place and moved closer to the trail instead. She couldn't pinpoint the exact location, but when she saw that Dan got visibly worried, she confirmed she saw him in the town just recently. I think the whole situation started to get in our heads. It's not like Brody was missing or something. He was probably traumatized and needed help coping with his friend's disappearance. And we wanted to offer him that help eventually. We just needed to find him. But first, find something that could help us understand what happened to his friend. The day of the hike started cloudy, with slight mist in the air making our faces wet. It was better than rain, at least. We packed tents just in case, but the plan was to do a whole day hike in the area and then go back. We weren't physically prepared for anything longer than that, with the lack of previous exercise and no real hiking experience. But we did our research, packed everything we could potentially need, and drove to the parking lot by the trail's entry point. I drew a long breath, expecting to enjoy the fresh morning air, but something was off. The neighborhood smelled. As we walked up the road, it smelled like sewage. I remember taking a bandana and wrapping it around my face to tame my gag reflex, but Dan didn't seem to be bothered by it. We were both quite tense, walking in silence, trying to locate the source of the smell, And finally, Dan pointed to the small cottage house behind the wooden fence. At first glance, it seemed that the side of the house had exploded or was taken by the wind. The roof was demolished from one side, and below it, the partially collapsed walls revealed what probably used to be a bathroom. The sink was still there, at least, exposed to the point it must have gathered rain when the weather was worse. A mirror hung over it, unbroken, and creamy white tiles surrounded it, now covered in dirt. What was weirder was there was a light inside the house and curtains partially dimming its windows from the inside, suggesting maybe someone still lived in this half-destroyed building. The stench was unbearable. It took me a moment to even comprehend what I was looking at, but it wasn't hard to locate its source from there. Dozens and dozens of cheap plastic buckets, mostly white and blue, scattered across the whole plot of land. The one closest to us, on the left of a big tree growing in the building's garden, was filled almost to the brim with what looked and smelled like feces. I remember the instant gag reflex, and Dan pulled me forward, rushing us deeper into the trail. With each step away from that weird house, the air cleared, and I was finally able to breathe again. I asked Dan what kind of maniac could live in a place like that, but he was silent. My brain still seemed to be dulled by the sensation in my stomach, as it took me a bit to add 1 to 1. Could it be Brody? I didn't say it out loud, and neither did Dan. I had to quickly change the topic. Honestly, my brain was just full of the most outrageous theories at that point, and I didn't want to feed it with more paranoia. The sky started to clear out soon after, and the sun came. We met some people on the trail and asked them about the mysterious outhouse and other weird things they've encountered. Some of them mentioned the weird house with the poop buckets as the only curiosity on the trail. Dan was clinging to his notes. I knew he had the approximate location of the outhouse noted down from past conversations with his cousin, but we had no more clues to follow. We walked mostly in silence, enjoying the weather and nature around us. Well, at least I did. I'm not really sure about Dan, who at that point was just silent. The sun was high in the sky when we arrived at the area we wanted to search through. We agreed to go off the beaten path, but not to separate. Whatever the real reason of the disappearances was, it only took one person each time, so to err on the side of caution, we always kept an eye on each other. There seemed to be no one else in the area, which was unusual, given the amount of people we've met on the trail before. I felt the familiar chill, similar to all those other times we visited after hearing creepy stories about them. Except that here, we knew something bad happened for real, and we were adamant about finding out what. We searched for all possible clues, scratches on the tree bark, lost items, holes in the ground, dangerous spots. As we walked around the tall grass, I thought about bears and mountain lions. I shared my worries with Dan. He only said that I should be less afraid of animals close to extinction, and more of those who are highly present on the trail and pose an actual danger. Humans. I remember it vividly. It was such a dark thing to say. I think I reacted with an awkward laugh, but Dan didn't laugh in response. I think we gave up after 2 hours, maybe 3. The sun was slowly going down, and if we weren't fast on our way back, we would have to use the headlamps we brought. We both expected there was no mysterious outhouse in the area, but the disappointment was still there. If we could only find something, anything to help Brody, or empathize with the guy somehow. Everything we found was just that weirdly empty area that gave us chills, probably for no other reason than by being related with the disappearance. We ate our protein bars and headed on our way back, leaving the spot marked on the map behind. I took another breath in, and lo and behold, I felt the stench. Again, I double-checked on my phone, but GPS was showing we were still far from the settlements, and the bucket garden was nowhere close to our proximity. I asked Dan whether he felt it too, and I remember him nodding. We kept close after that and walked off the beaten path towards the clearing we saw on our left. The trees obstructed the view partially, but as we maneuvered between them, we finally noticed it. The outhouse. We approached faster, then circled around it. I don't recall when I put the bandana on my face again to block off the smell. I think I just did it automatically. What I do remember is Dan's face, contorting in disgust, and the smell. It felt like something died inside of it, and I'm not using these words lightly. I was scared of that smell. There didn't seem to be anything particularly menacing about it, though. Well, except for the smell. The shack stood in the bright light of the sun on the edge of the forest. It was made out of withered wood with some planks deformed by now. There was a moon-shaped hole on its doors. I recall immediately thinking there was something inside because the doors were slightly moving and making creaking sounds, but as we observed it for a minute or so, it turned out to be just wind. I asked Dan if it was possible that it was the same outhouse his cousin talked about. The map location didn't match exactly, so he wasn't sure. There were probably more outhouses in the area anyway, but why so far off the path? Maybe not to scare the hackers with the smell? I took a few quick pictures with my phone for the blog post we wanted to write about our trip, and then we just stood in front of it, before Dan asked who was going in first. We had to. We absolutely had to check what was inside. Given, judging by the foul smell, it was probably just a really disgusting toilet. I gagged at the thought of shining my phone's flashlight down the pit to see whether there was anything of interest there, but it had to be done if we were to properly investigate it. I think I started to be really afraid when Dan asked me that one question I was definitely not looking forward to. What if my cousin's friend is down there? He said. I mean, it was possible. Maybe the police didn't check this outhouse because Brody gave them the wrong location. And before you ask, we thought about calling them immediately, but the signal was just not there. We couldn't exactly tell them where we were without leading them from the road, and we both felt like we needed some strong evidence for them to pick up the investigation again. We were armed with phone cameras and flashlights. All we needed to do was take quick pictures of what's down there and then go back. Despite the disgust and fear, I decided to go first. We were prepared for this, equipped with many theories about how an outhouse could make someone disappear. Losing consciousness, falling down the pit was our main concern, so as a preemptive measure, I shielded my face with more cloth and tied a rope around my waist, with its other end wrapped around the nearby tree and held firmly by Dan. I know that's a lot for simply going inside an old privy, but we treated this seriously. The plan was to take a deep breath outside and hope it will suffice for a quick look inside, not to inhale whatever toxic fumes were lingering inside. I remember that when I touched the doors, it almost stung me how cold the wood was. Weirdly cold, considering the outhouse stood in the bright sun for most of the day. Was it to be blamed on some weird chemical process happening inside? I had no idea. I pulled the doors open with my foot, then went in, trying my best not to vomit. It seemed to be just a regular old outhouse. A wooden box to sit on with a circular hole inside of it and darkness below. I turned my phone's flashlight on and held it tight in my hand, afraid I would drop it. With the camera app on, I leaned slightly down, pointing it at the hole and squinting my eyes to see better. I remember doing it once before when I was a kid, during Scouts camp. It was some stupid truth or dare thing, and the dare was to light the flashlight down the outhouse hole to peek at what's inside. As you can imagine, it was a disgusting mess of waste and trash, from feces to toilet paper, menstrual pads, tampons, plastic bottles, random things kids threw down there. I vaguely recall seeing a shoe in someone's wallet, never to be retrieved again. But here, it struck me that I saw nothing. Not even the ground. The light of my flashlight didn't reach whatever was down there. I took some pictures with quick presses of the button, making sure my phone was saving them. As I looked at the screen, I thought I saw something out of the corner of my eye. Something moving. You may think me crazy, but my mouth just opened and I said that name we heard back in town. Caleb. I really don't know why I said it, but that's the last thing I remember before the rope on my waist was pulled with great force. It took me a second to understand that it was Dan pulling me from outside. Once I was out there again, I was finally able to breathe freely. I noticed it had gotten dark, and Dan scolded me for taking so long without replying. I don't remember hearing him say anything when I was inside. I told him he could check inside too, as long as he remembered about the rope, as it really seemed like the hole dug under the outhouse was dangerously deep. And the floor didn't feel too sturdy. He was messing with the tie as I stood there, zooming in on the pictures on my phone that I took inside the outhouse. They were all blurry. Even the wooden planks caught in the frame were hard to discern from each other. I wiped my phone's camera, quietly cursing the quality. I told Dan to take more pictures inside, as mine all seemed busted. As I flipped the phone around, I accidentally swiped earlier in the album to the pictures I took from outside. I felt my breath catch in my lungs as my heartbeat quickened, and I swiped from left to right, rubbing my eyes, rubbing my phone, tapping it furiously to make sure what I saw was real. The pictures I took, none of them showed the outhouse at all. I heard the wooden creak, and then I swear I heard someone, not Dan, not my voice, but a voice nonetheless, making a sound that felt like a whisper and a scream all at once. It sounded boyish, melodic, but also like crying. When I pulled my eyes from my phone and looked up, I saw Dan, tied with the rope to a tree, skin now covered somehow with what looked like mud. He was kneeling on the ground, not moving, not looking at me. And the outhouse was gone. The stench stood, but the source was Dan himself. We rushed back, or rather, I rushed him back. Dan was silent, but calm, acting like he didn't fully understand why we were walking so fast or where we were going. I tried to talk to him. I kept on repeating the same question. What the hell happened? But he gave non-replies only. The only proof that something happened was the stinky dirt that covered him, but he claimed he didn't know the source of it and he just needed a shower after a long day. We went past the house of buckets. A tall, broad-shouldered man was standing in the garden, placing another blue bucket on the ground before he lifted his head to meet my gaze. He noticed Dan and his face changed. I saw fear in his eyes. I started walking faster, silently praying for him not to stop us. And he didn't. Everything has changed since then. Dan seems to have lost interest in our group and the road trips, and all of our relations with him just evaporated. He didn't even seem to remember the names of some of us. We contacted his family. I tried to tell them what happened, but they wouldn't listen. His mother said her son was fine, and we should just let it go. I still remember her saying, "Sometimes people go separate ways." Maybe she was right. Maybe I imagined what happened because I was tired and dehydrated after the long hike. Maybe Dan found it weird or scary, or maybe he just wanted to forget, and I should too. I wish I could. I still look at these photos sometimes. Maybe it's just my imagination, but I think I see something there. I'm sure this story sounds like I'm going crazy, and you're all going to tell me I've imagined everything that happened. Or maybe I'll get some answers. That's why I've decided to share everything, photos included. I just want to sleep soundly again. And I want my friend back.